Welcome to TP Talks, PwC's Global Transfer Pricing podcast series. My name is Dana Hart, and we welcome you to our next episode where we will discuss recent developments around advanced pricing arrangements, or APAs. Let me introduce our speakers for this episode. Joining me today is Junko Yamato, a partner with PwC Japan, Carolyn Faneroff, a managing director with PwC US, and Jana Lesney, also a managing director with PwC US. Our trio will discuss their recent experience with APAs in Japan and the US generally, as well as touch on bilateral APAs between the US and Japan, which continue to enjoy high interest among both taxpayers and revenue authorities. Carolyn, you are our moderator for today, so over to you.
Thanks, Dana, and hi, everybody. I'm really looking forward to this podcast with Jana and Junko, where we've got a really interesting program planned for you. So the pandemic has created an environment where we've got taxing jurisdictions that are going to be looking to raise revenues from large multinationals. So in this situation, we have U.S. multinationals, Japanese multinationals, and multinationals from around the world sort of situated in the same way, which is that governments want to tax a piece of their revenue. So the most similar correlate to this period was the post-Lehman shock period, following about 2010. So at that time, we saw our clients faced with adjustments from all over the world, from South Africa, in Asia, Indonesia, Thailand, all over the place. So all three of us were around at that time working on APAs, and I'd like to ask Jana and Junko, what are your thoughts? What lessons do we have from that period that can help our clients today? So Jana, I'm going to start with you.
Thanks, Carolyn. What we saw during that period, and it's relevant for now, is maybe even highly relevant for now, given what we expect to see in terms of an uptick in, global transfer pricing audits, is that you look for the port in the storm, and in many ways, APAs are the best and sometimes the only real port in the storm to try to navigate through uncertainty and through difficult audits. You can use them proactively before an onset of an audit to try to achieve a reasonable transfer pricing outcome in the event that there is an audit. You can use an APA to try to for future years, try to level set the outcomes. So we saw APAs be very effective tools to try to, get out from under what could have otherwise been really, very difficult and repetitive audit scenarios in a lot of different jurisdictions. And we know that, you can't get APAs with every country. The U.S. doesn't have treaties with every country, and also it's very time-consuming and burdensome to try to seek it for multiple jurisdictions in many cases. But the other thing is with APAs is that they have some knock-on influence effect for other taxing authorities. So in this case, for example, an APA between the U.S. and Japan, two very experienced, very strong taxing authorities, while not dispositive for an audit in another jurisdiction, still may have some influence on an audit, particularly for a country in Pan-Asia, for example, or North America, because governments can look at that and realize that a lot of the analysis and work has already been done in many ways, and they can leverage from that.
Super. So that's great, and that's a perfect segue over to you, Junko. Maybe can you talk about this question from the Japanese perspective? How do APAs work best, given this pandemic environment?
Yes, thank you, Carolyn. US and Japan APAs, from our point of view, it is a very reliable and stable procedure among many APAs and map relationships. And it is built on a long history and historically very difficult cases and many precedences. But it is now stable and reliable and being utilized to resolve complex issues like, as you are referring to, because of COVID. It sometimes takes time and efforts, of course, but at the end of the day, when we say reliable, we generally see issues are being resolved through the procedure. One beneficial aspect is that the APA traffic transaction are very heavy and the traffic goes both ways. The issues covered could be based on the assessments on US multinationals as well as for the Japanese multinationals. So when it comes to the negotiation between the two tax authorities, it is helpful to have the traffic both ways because we could see a balanced resolution based on arm's length standard during the negotiation, because one issue could be favorable to one tax authority, whereas the same issue could be beneficial for the other taxing authority on another case. So I do think that the relationship between US and Japan is helpful in coming to a balanced resolution because of that environment. Referring to post-Lehman experience, I do think that one thing I do recall was it was refreshing to see the prospective aspect or forward-looking aspect of the APA facilitating more of a transformational issue than a historical issue. So thinking in COVID situation today, yes, we may be tackling with the issues in 2020, but we also are facing the issues where the businesses are dealing with the pandemic in a way by changing the way the operation works. And sometimes that trigger a tweak to TP policies or business models that the policies are based on. And because of the multi-years included in the APA negotiations, it helps us see issue being resolved in a more forward-looking way and future transfer pricing policies being truly covered in real time.
Thanks, Junko. So what I hear you saying is you're talking about maybe sort of COVID's forcing some of our clients to restructure their operations. And the APA program is a way to address that, to give coverage going forward of this new structure. So let me go to you, Jana. What are your thoughts on that? I think that's a really interesting point.
Absolutely. If a company's considering changing its supply lines or restructuring and wants to manage the uncertainty around that, as often is the case, particularly between the U.S. and Japan, an APA continues to be the best way of trying to get certainty proactively and prospectively around all of that. But even for companies that, aren't really necessarily thinking about restructuring, they're just dealing with the impact of COVID on their operations, on their bottom line. What we're finding is that, look, this is a huge topic amongst the governments, the treaty partners themselves. They were talking to each other about all of this for about a year now, and to some degree kind of waiting for 2020 to be over so that companies would have data really on the shape of the impact impact for them for 2020, but we know that APMA, as a matter of course, asks taxpayers in the APA program or are thinking about going into the APA program to talk to them about COVID, the impact of COVID. They have certain questions that they have in mind, and they listen. So it's a chance for companies to kind of shape their own narrative in terms of the impact and to also try to work with APMA and also in this case with the NTA to come up with creative ways to deal with the immediate impact, future impact, and also for additional contingencies down the road, maybe through critical assumptions. I mean, APAs can have flexibility built into them as well, but you have to plan for that really from the outset. So APAs are an excellent vehicle, as Junko was saying, to deal with, a multitude of aspects of the impact of COVID, for companies that, again, are trying to continue to do things the same, but need maybe a different transfer pricing policy or have their historic policy applied maybe in a different way while they really sort of dig themselves out of some of the impact of 2020. But yeah, if they're restructuring, it's really the way to get the government's approval upfront prospectively, with respect to any restructuring.
Super, Jana, thanks. I want to switch gears a little bit and Junko, maybe ask you to talk about sort of the triangle transactions. I think that one of the things for our clients to think about is, maybe they're going to decide to get an APA between two jurisdictions, between the U.S. and Japan or the U.S. and the U.K., but yet they've got transactions with many different countries. Junko, what are your thoughts about using an APA, a bilateral between the U.S. and Japan, sort of as a halo or to give cover to other transactions? Can you give us your thoughts on that?
Sure. The negotiation with the U.S. taxing authority by Japanese tax authority is one of the biggest trading counterparty and most powerful and very difficult negotiations. So having gone through that type of negotiation would give taxpayer quite a bit of credibility in terms of their profile as well as their transfer pricing position. So it is helpful. The impact in terms of the conversation with other countries may not be direct, but I think it is certainly an indirect impact or a halo effect, as you said, in that conversation with other countries. Certainly, there will be local specific issues that we continue to deal with in terms of local comparables or location savings or other issues that we may face. But even there, I think that we see that, for example, the transfer pricing methodology, the core foundation of the position, if that is being negotiated in the past with the US government, then it would be, for example, difficult to tackle that foundation, but rather the issue could be more about application for that particular country.
Great. Thank you, Junko. Jana, what are your thoughts on the utility, sort of getting a little extra bang for your buck with an APA?
Well, first of all, I think that in today's world with C-by-C reporting, with upticks of exchange of information, just with requests on audit about information about what kind of rulings, including APAs, you have, to some degree, these things tend to get out anyway, but that's not a bad thing because, again, when you have two governments like the IRS and the NTA that are very experienced dance partners with each other, right? I mean, they've been doing it in the APA arena for about 30 years now. Really, the first, bilateral APA was U.S.-Japan, and Junko said earlier, it's a level playing field, which isn't always the case. A lot of times, particularly for U.S. multinationals, the operations are, inbound to a specific country, and there's very little reciprocity. Here, there's a great deal of reciprocity, so the issues get dealt with in a way reflective of that. And as a result, the APA outcomes, I think that they tend to be more reflective of really also, what the governments, in this case, the IRS and the NTA, really think is the right answer rather than necessarily trying to put something to another country to protect its tax base. So I do think that when you have an APA with two authorities such as the IRS and the NTA, you can deploy it somewhat influentially. Again, I think it's most influential in the region, right? Particularly because of market similarities, perhaps, and also, of course, if the transactions are reasonably the same and whatnot. I mean, a lot of factors go into it, but I've seen tax authorities actually look at APAs that have been negotiated and resolved where one of the taxpayers at least is in their region, and they take it very seriously. And I think they're even sometimes appreciative because it helps with their own analysis, particularly on an audit, because they know a lot of time and resources and critical thinking have already been utilized to come up with the outcome for that particular APA. And while it's not dispositive of where they go in their own thought process, or particularly in an audit, it certainly can have influence on and bearing on that direction.
Yep, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. So I want to switch gears a little bit, and John Hughes, who's the director of the U.S. Advanced Pricing and Mutual Agreement Program at the IRS, was on the record recently reminding companies that at the end of the day, at the negotiating table, two governments need to come together to find a solution. So he was talking specifically about COVID strategies, and sometimes a COVID strategy that a company would deploy perhaps would tilt to one country in favor of another country. But I think he's telling taxpayers at the end of the day, the governments have to agree. So, with that in mind, what are a few thoughts that you can give our audience about this subject? So, Junko, let's start with you.
Right. I do appreciate more insights coming from the IRS as a practitioner. The issues we are facing are very difficult and also without precedent. So I do think that we do have to think really hard in terms of what are the specifics and what are the facts relating to certain transfer pricing position, or what are the alternatives that would be potentially a balanced resolution at the end of the day. I think we do have to work hard, but at the same time, it will be very helpful to have a robust dialogue with the tax authority, with NTA and IRS, to understand what their view of the balanced resolution, because of that unique nature of the current environment, and cases are different for each taxpayer. So in order to come to certain scenarios or a certain position, I think that even more than ever, the dialogues with the IRS and NTA, even during the CA, would be helpful for us as well in terms of suggesting alternative scenarios. And I think looking at the case in a sort of more holistic way, including the future years as well as historical years, may provide us more sort of negotiating points under the APA framework. So certainly it is much better to have that kind of dialogue, and including more years under negotiation would be helpful in resolving unique cases relating to current COVID situation.
Great. Thank you, Junko. So I heard about dialogue with the government, adding more years. Jana, what are your thoughts on this?
Thanks. I think what Junko said is 100% correct in terms of needing to engage early and regularly, to be an advocate with the governments, to be communicative, to be transparent, because they are looking at the end of the day for, as Junko said, a balanced resolution. We do have, various analyses in our toolkit that we can bring forward to try to level set for discussions around the impact of COVID and, in various ways, depending on the particular facts and circumstance of each of our taxpayers. There's no one size fits all, but we do have various, analyses. And I think some of this also is going to lend itself to, in some ways, to a need to be creative. We're going to have to be prepared to come up with corroborating analyses to, to help get through some of the more binary type issues as well. One of the things we know the governments are struggling with is, expenses, subsidies. They're either above the line or below the line. And, it's tough to, compromise on that or sometimes reach an agreement. So we have to help the governments support them in their analyses to, I think, mitigate in many ways the impact of that, whether it's through, like I said, corroborating analyses or through, a thorough understanding of local country gap and what's going on with the comps. But we've got to be ready to, help to bridge the gap, particularly with issues where, you can look at it as very much a kind of a black or white outcome. And, we need to be able to break through that as an obstacle to a resolution, because at the end of the day, the governments really are looking for something to support really an arm's length result. And there may be, multiple ways of getting there, but we have to help them to achieve that.
Thank you. That's really useful. So thank you both. As we bring this to a close, I'm wondering, can you each give me your top takeaways in just a minute or two? Jana and then Junko.
Thanks, Carolyn. One thing that I don't know we emphasized quite enough here yet is that the relationship between the U.S. and Japan really is a very strong one, particularly in the APA arena. The two governments meet, whether it's virtually or in person, really every few months at this point and talk in between. So from the perspective of, if you're thinking about an APA, is this going to work? Will the governments reach an agreement? I feel very comfortable that when it's U.S. and Japan, of course, there's work to be done. But ultimately, again, to quote Junko, there will be a resolution. It will be that balanced resolution, and companies, our clients, will achieve the certainty they crave. I also think that it's important for all of us whenever we are speaking with our clients to be, asking them about, where they're audited, in the world, U.S., Japan, other jurisdictions, because where they are being audited or worried about being audited, one of the most powerful tools, as we've talked about, continues to be, the APA, and it can also be very, very cost effective. And once you get the first APA, you're out of annual documentation, you get efficiencies with renewals. I'd like to also say that, as a takeaway, it can become a very comfortable and necessary conversation with our clients when they have concerns about audits in various jurisdictions.
Super. Thank you. Junko?
Yes, U.S.-Japan relationship in APA and MAP is the top priority for the Japanese government, we understand. So I think that this good, balanced, and productive relationship is here to stay to help us resolve difficult issues. Another point is that recent reorganization at the local tax authority here, focusing on certain services, transactions, as well as intercompany interest transactions being now delegated to tax office examiners rather than the specialists, and a refocus of TP documentation, all sort of pointing us to more disputes locally. So APA would be a good way and helpful way to protect tax teams and managing the tax liabilities under such environment in a more amicable way and without risk of penalties. And lastly, I think I echo Jana's point that it is a very reliable and prospective process where two governments have so much experience in dealing each other in resolving complex issues. So the system itself is becoming more and more important and becoming a critical piece in terms of the transfer pricing tax risk management of many of our clients.
Great. Jana Lesney, Junko Yamato, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. And Dana, we'll hand it back to you.
Thank you, Carolyn, Junko, and Jana, for joining me today to discuss APAs. I also want to thank our listeners. We will continue to release these podcasts regularly. If you have any questions, we encourage you to reach out to your regular PwC transfer pricing contact for immediate response. Thank you for listening and have a great day.
This podcast is brought to you by PwC, all rights reserved. PwC refers to the U.S. member firm or one of its subsidiaries or affiliates and may sometimes refer to the PwC network. Each member firm is a separate legal entity. Please see www.pwc.com/structure for further details. This podcast is for general information purposes only and should not be used as a substitute for consultation with professional advisors.